started. Tonight, the presentation that I'm giving is for both Wings credit to those of you who are FAA proficient and working towards your Wings credit. It's also our quarterly safety meeting for the TakeWING Aviation Club. And some of you out here watching this are not TakeWING Aviation Club members, so you should know that we give quarterly meetings really as an active way of staying in touch with our members, presenting ideas which we hope will be useful to them as pilots in their ongoing pursuit of proficiency. If you have not had any information about our aviation club, please feel free to contact me, or you can take a look at our website and peruse that, and then contact me, because we'd love to have you. So, let's just talk about our goals tonight. Obviously, the idea is that we have pilots who oftentimes don't make the best choices while either on the ground or in the air. And that is shown in the accident rate for personal flights. And it's also something I think as an instructor I see in talking to our pilots, not just our members, but pilots that I work with outside of our club. So really the idea behind tonight's presentation is maybe to give some thought and ideas of how to reduce operational errors. And in doing so, maybe reduce some FAA enforcement actions, but really we want to make flying funner. And note, I'm not saying funnier. We want to make it funner. And flying, because we all know, has some risks. Sometimes those risks create an impression that it's not fun. And certainly I see this in training beginning pilots, and even in advanced training, that you get to working so hard and you're sweating, and you're pretty well overwhelmed by things in the flight world while you're training, and it doesn't feel like it's fun. So you should know that actually primary flight training is fairly safe. And some of the statistics show us that in a structured environment that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, most of the time you're going up with an instructor, or you're being observed by your instructor, and that parlays itself into, for the most part, a safer time of flying. So that often also begs a question. Is the problem that we're having with overall accident rate and incidents and so forth, if the problem occurs after flight training, then the question really comes down to what I think is two things. One is, did the teacher fail to teach, or did the student pilot fail to learn? And I don't know that I can answer that. Okay, I think most of us are aware that pilots being human, and while we're proud to be humans, we're still going to be human and have human errors. And human errors cause things to happen. So we're going to have personal experiences that cause us to question our abilities. We're going to have situations where we inadvertently break a regulation, or we might witness such a thing from a fellow pilot who has had an event which either directly or indirectly affected us. And I don't want to be pessimistic here, but unless you take the human out of the pilot, you can't eliminate these occurrences completely. So that's why you have seen in your risk management checklist that the pilot is one of the preeminent parts of the checklist. PAVE, P-A-V-E, is a well-known checklist we use, and P stands for pilot, A for aircraft, V for environment, E for the external pressures that we have. So we want to be able tonight to talk about these things and find out if there are ways to either lessen the errors, or at least recognize that when we are experiencing a situation which could lead us down a road to an accident chain. And tonight's discussion is called The Art of Self-Disclosure, not Self-Delusion. And there's a reason for that. We can assume that discussing situations which may have led us to an error or deviation is in our best interest. So, even if nobody was hurt, you had a situation where nobody saw you do it, or perhaps nobody heard it, and therefore nobody but you knows about it, and you decide, well, you shouldn't tell, that's really not going to do us any good. In fact, it's a myth that what you don't tell won't hurt you, because it really means that you're not opening yourself up for the discussion. For us to be able to recognize events and be able to learn while they are occurring what to do to lessen the effects, we have to be able to talk about this and disclose what happened after the fact as well. So that's part of the process of dealing with and learning how to eliminate or at least reduce errors. We want to acknowledge, therefore, that we make mistakes, and then we want to say, what do we do when one happens? And also, we want to, in the bigger picture, help other pilots, either from experience the same kind of event, or at least give them a clue as to how to reduce the effects of a possible event when it's happening. And also, of course, if you witness another pilot experiencing an event or occurrence which may or may not cause an operational deviation, but at least something that is you feel is severe, that maybe you can provide that pilot with some helpful advice. So that's what we want to talk about. And let's just back up a minute and discuss the kinds of events we're talking about, because pilots definitely have different thresholds of what they consider an event. And so how do you know if you've experienced an event or operational deviation? That's a good question. Well, first, I could say that if you have to say, wow, I just, and you can fill in the blank, really scared the hell out of myself, that's a good clue, all right? It may be subjective, because not everyone comes to flying or is flying with the same experience level. And so you can even relate, that may even relate to your internal ability to comprehend a situation was dangerous. So I remember I had a student I was teaching in a tail dragger, and very low time, and as we were taking off, the pilot to be was wandering all over the place, and barely off the ground in almost stalled condition, headed for the windshock when I finally took over. And the pilot, in a very honest discussion about this afterward, really didn't understand that this was possibly a dangerous situation. So it doesn't mean just because you're a pilot or a student pilot or a highly experienced pilot that you can recognize these events. But there are some other clues. If you have to say uh-oh, and something causes you to say uh-oh, then that's a good clue. If the tower asks you to copy a phone number down before, when you're ready to copy, they ask you to take a phone number down, it's probably a good clue. If another pilot or flight instructor comes up to you and asks if you would like to have a conversation about something that just happened, that's a good clue, all right? But most of us really do have an inner compass that tells us that something wasn't quite right. And in so doing, we might even say to ourselves, well, what's wrong with me? Maybe I shouldn't be a pilot, or wonder in some of the more difficult situations whether you're going to have an enforcement action. So generally, we can say an event has happened when one or more of these clues that we've just talked about, when one or more of these feelings occurs. But let's dig a little deeper into some examples. So I have, for just purposes of making it easier, to kind of differentiate it between incidents at non-towered and towered or closed airports. But these can happen at towered airports and controlled airspace just as easily. So some examples of WOW occurrences. These are examples that you can relate to, I think, and you might even have had happen to you. Landing on the wrong runway. Maybe you miscalculated the wind direction. By the way, it is known that tasks that are highly practiced, such as checklist completion, are the most vulnerable to memory lapses. And one of the things that they've discovered is a habitual routine. For example, the use of prior steps in a checklist. If one of those steps is inadvertently interrupted, or is interrupted for some reason, and there's no trigger to follow the next step, then we're vulnerable. In other words, if you get interrupted before you put your gear down, it's quite likely that you might miss the gear down because you're not having the same clues as you're used to. And of course, we're vulnerable to memory lapses when our work load is overloaded, when we're stressed, when we're fatigued, when we have sleep deprivation. So pilots and air traffic controllers are most susceptible during periods of high workload. So landing on the wrong runway, bouncing a landing where aircraft control becomes a real issue. This is one which I think most of us may experience at least once in our flying lifetime. And if you've ever experienced a really bad landing, had to go around, and you're in the midst of coming back around downwind, you're probably have a high, your pulse is up. You're wondering if you're going to make this next landing okay, and of course all of that stress leads to the possibility of another bad landing. So we want to find ways that we can reduce that stress, even if you have an event that causes you to initially feel out of control. Another pretty typical, and it really is hard to believe, but it does happen, landing at the wrong airport, and I've seen this a couple of times this year, so I think it's not unusual, but it also happens to airline pilots, which of course gets them in a lot more trouble. Having the wrong frequency may or may not be a wow occurrence, but it could lead to one. And low on fuel. Well, when we're low on fuel, if we know we're low on fuel, that can lead our stress level. But just as important is this concept that when we land and we start to refuel and we discover that we were a lot lower on fuel than we thought we were, that's a moment where we say, what am I doing wrong? What have I done? How did that happen? And something to think about, because maybe we misread our fuel gauge in the very, very beginning of the flight, or maybe we were trying to get off to a start a lot earlier and we didn't fill up like we thought, or maybe we let somebody else fuel the aircraft and they misfueled it. So there are a lot of reasons for low fuel, which can cause us concern. And of course, the gear up landing, which most insurance companies really frown on, and we see these gear up landings here at Crestwell just as often, I think, as they do at the Eugene Airport. And again, what causes them? Well, the next question that we, of course, run into a wow occurrence would be inadvertent flying into instrument meteorological conditions, and that's nothing to be taken lightly. And we want to say to ourselves, how did that happen, and how do we prevent it? And of course, most if not all of these can occur because of inadequate information in the very beginning or during the flight. So, what about operational deviations, these OO moments? We're not the only ones that have them. Certainly airlines and air traffic controllers do as well. And we can talk a little bit about some that might have happened to you or may happen to you. And again, for differentiating these, this could happen just as well at a non-towered airport, but these are common or at least possible events at towered airports or en route. And of course, flying into controlled airspace without proper authorization. You didn't see the restricted area on your chart, or you didn't see the TFR, or didn't get a NOTAM, which caused an infraction. Another common one is, she said, but I heard. Okay, what does that mean? Well, the air traffic controller said one thing, but you heard another, because your expectation was you were going to hear something that you were expecting the air traffic controller to say something, and she said something different, but you continued to hear what you thought she was going to say. I think this happens in families as well, right? Okay, right number, wrong result. Given their number 230, for example, you think that they are talking about descending to 2,300. Instead, they're talking about turning to a heading of 230. That can also happen with the frequency change, where we get the right number, but we get the wrong result. We put it in the wrong radio, for example. Wrong runway, again, landing on the wrong runway. It's not as hard as it may sound to do, and that can cause problems. And finally, some taxi traumas that could happen. You know, we get lost on our way somewhere, or we miss a turn, and these can be fairly serious. Okay, what is my dog? This isn't my dog. You guys know my dog is Lucy, but this is Snowball, my friend's dog. And Snowball, unfortunately, has the cone. You know, the cone of silence, and I call this the cone of confusion. The cones of confusion happen when things start to fall apart, and pretty much things start to really just kind of get out of hand. When a cone of confusion happens to a dog, they just start punching, you know, into things like the walls and so forth, and the bed and the coffee table. When it happens to us, especially during flight or when we're in a high-stress information load, the snowball effect becomes sometimes a recipe for disaster. Well, the people who know a lot about this have identified 6 actions that are part of the poor judgment chain. Let's just take a quick look at these. First one would be that the pilot did something which should not have been done. All right, well, that's obvious. Another one would be a pilot or an air traffic controller. By the way, this happens to air traffic controllers as well. Pilot or the air traffic controller did too much when less should have been done. All right. Another third one would be the no-do, or the pilot did not do something which should have been done. They did not descend at the proper time. They did not climb at the proper time. They did not change the frequency at the proper time. Those are pretty obvious examples. Or they did something too early. The pilot descended too early and ran into a granite wall. That would be one that we wouldn't want to see, but that's an example. Maybe the pilot did not do enough. They don't add enough power for the go-around, or they did not give enough information or did not get enough information to make a safe decision. And then, of course, there's the final one, the late do. The pilot acted too late, and the action should have been initiated earlier. So those are the 6 actions that can be part of a poor judgment chain. Okay, so let's just take a minute and look at a pretty impressive example of a lot of things happening at once, a lot of these judgment chains going into effect from both the pilot and the air traffic controller's side, which, while nothing too terrible happens, you can easily see where the snowball effect occurs. So take a listen, watch the diagram as the flight progresses, and then see if you can pick out some of the more obvious judgment chain characteristics. And you know, let's not be too hard on the pilot or the well, you can be as hard as you want on the air traffic controller, but let's not be too hard on the pilot. We've all had really confusing moments in our flying careers, and we will have them. Well, let's take a look at this.
Republic Tower, Cherokee 80 Fox Golf is with you over the Captree Bridge, inbound with Bravo.
Inbound with Bravo, who's in?
This is 80 Fox Golf, Cherokee.
Cherokee 80 Foxtrot Golf, Republic, safe position.
We're just over the Captree Bridge, sorry, I must have a problem with the radio.
Cherokee 80 Foxtrot Golf, left downwind runway 19er.
Left downwind 19, 80 Fox Golf.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, ident. Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, do you see the airport?
Yeah, I see the airport.
Okay, did you understand your instructions, November 80 Foxtrot Golf?
Sorry, you want to be left downwind for 19.
That's correct. So how are you planning on getting there when you're westbound along the middle of the bay?
My apologies, making the turn now.
Okay, this is what I'd like you to do, sir. Do you know where Belmont Lake is, 80 Foxtrot Golf?
No, I don't.
All right, from your present position, what I suggest is a 030 heading. Maintain VFR. Suggested heading 030. Continue for now. That's a suggested heading only, northeastbound.
030. All right, I'll be looking for the lake.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, what's your heading?
030.
November 80 Foxtrot Golf. Okay. Try the ident feature again, please. Say heading, correction, say altitude.
Altitude is 1650.
Pattern altitude, we go 1,100 feet.
All right, I'll go to 6 then.
Okay. November 80 Foxtrot Golf. There's something wrong with your compass because you're headed northwest instead of northeast, and you're cutting across the departure path of the departing aircraft. The aircraft has a serious navigation problem, sir. You need to get that compass looked at really, really closely.
All right. Just passing over 3-2 now. I see runway 1. You wanted me to make a left downwind for 19, correct?
We all saw you, sir. Continue northbound.
Continue northbound, 80 Fox Golf.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf. What does your compass say now?
Northbound heading.
Okay. So it says northbound now, and I guess you're on about a 020 heading according to my radar map. But earlier you were telling me that you were 030 and you were definitely headed northwest.
What would you like me to do?
I'd like you to head in the direction you're heading now. I'll let you know when to turn left.
80 Fox Golf.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, you're over a big highway. I want you to turn left and follow the highway.
Turning left, follow the highway.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, do you see the runway?
I see the runway.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, runway 19er cleared to land, wind 200 at 12.
Clear to land, 80 Fox Golf, 19.
All right, number 80 Foxtrot Golf, I'm totally stumped as to what you're doing.
I'm coming in on 19 like you told me to do.
Really? Okay.
I got turned around. I don't know what I'm doing today.
Fine, it's got a big 14 at the end. You can land that runway or you can pick another runway. I'm going to give you your choice of any runway on the airport. So 200 at 10 is the wind. The altimeter 303 run. November 80 Foxtrot Golf, you're cleared to land any runway.
Okay, I'm landing on 19. I'm turning right to final now.
Wind check 200 at 10. No need to acknowledge.
Republic Tower, 80 Fox Golf. I'm going to echo.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf. You know where the Alpha taxiway is?
Yes.
Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, do you think you can turn right on Alpha?
Turn right on Alpha.
Okay, 80 Foxtrot Golf, I want you to stop the aircraft. And after you stop the aircraft, I want you to change frequencies to 121.6. Do you understand? Number 80 Foxtrot Golf, Republic Tower.
80 Fox Golf, Republic Tower.
Okay, switch to ground, sir. The frequency you need to tune in is 21.6. Do you understand? Over.
I got it, 21.6.
Well, I suspect you could spot several of the action items that led to the poor judgment chain on both the air traffic controller and the pilot side. I don't know how many there were. There's a combination, I think, and I think there were at least 3 or 5 of the 6. So we can see the snowball effect in action and how the information that the air traffic controller was giving the pilot may have led even to his greater confusion. I think the air traffic controller was being rather passive-aggressive. You know, you got somebody, there's something wrong with your compass. I mean, just come out and say it. You're going the wrong direction, and check your heading indicator. These are things that the air traffic controller, if he had been a little more aware of how it is to be a pilot and what's going on in the cockpit, he might have been able to help the pilot better. Look, when things are falling apart, it doesn't do any good at that moment to refrain from giving accurate and actual information that will help either the pilot or the air traffic controller. In this case, for example, the air traffic controller gave the pilot an approximate heading. I think he said turn to a heading of either 020 or 030, and the pilot, I believe, turned to a heading of 330. So there's an example of what we were talking about earlier about, getting the expectation of a heading. The pilot really was turned around, I think, and was not heading in the right direction, obviously, but he also was a bit turned around as to where left or right was and where the airport was. So all of these things came into a head, and the air traffic controller certainly wasn't helpful. Well, let's take a look at another situation, and again, not to pick on, and this is not to pick on general aviation pilots, so let's pick on our senior pilots, those who are flying the airlines. Majority of fatal pilot-induced accidents, like 51%, are a result of a decisional behavior or cognitive judgment that is involved in choosing a course of action from several alternatives. And really, when we talk about hazard perception and recognition of conditions that pose threats to our safety, we have to recognize these hazards as early as early as possible, since that gives us more time to react. Hazards can be caused by lots of things: actions that are taken or not taken by the pilot or the air traffic controller, knowledge or skill deficiencies, weather conditions, the aircraft's performance or its configuration. People or other aircraft outside the aircraft can be hazards, and cargo, for example. So, or combinations of these factors. So the next audio and visual we're going to look at is a good example of many of these hazards coming together in one situation. But it's also a wonderful example of situational awareness and resource management on the part of everyone who's playing the game, as I call it. The game isn't just you and the air traffic controller, it's other pilots who are involved outside of your aircraft who may be in the same area or nearby. So let's take a look at that and give you an example of how that plays out here. And this is a United United flight, and they have just landed. The scene is that it's dark and foggy out, and so a lot of the hazards that we'd expect are there, and perhaps we even are falling into one of those situations where they've been there many times and they are aware of their surroundings and expect to be one place when they're not. So let's take a look at this.
United 1448, what's your position? And we're clear of the runway on November by Bravo, United 1448. United 1448, thank you. Taxi to the ramp via taxiways November and Tango, report crossing runway 16. Okay, November, Tango will report crossing runway 16 on the 1448.
Ground user 2998 is holding short behind FedEx.
Yes, sir, 2998, thank you. FedEx 1662, runway 5 right, fly runway heading, cleared for takeoff.
Runway heading, clear for takeoff, 5 right, FedEx 1662.
Now 1448 is on November by the runways here. We don't see the return across straight ahead on November.
United 1448, affirmative, cross runway 16, join taxiway November Tango on the other side.
November Tango on the other side, United 1448. And United 1448, we're approaching Kilo here. Somebody just took off.
United 1448, you shouldn't be anywhere near Kilo. Hold your position, please. Just stop. Hi, this is United 1448. We are currently on a runway. I was looking out to the right with a Kilo. We need to go on to the Kilo taxiway. United 1448, you were supposed to taxi November in Tango. I need to know what runway you're on. I can't see anything from the tower.
Ma'am, we are on 23 right, intersection of 16, and we did not connect on November. We are by Kilo to our right, and we just overshot Kilo. We did not see it. Runway on 23 left here.
United, stand by, please. Yes, sir, 2998, runway 5 right, fly runway heading, cleared for takeoff.
Ma'am, I'm trying to advise you we're on an active runway, United 1448.
2P right is not an active runway. It's a taxiway when we're IFR or in the dark. Yes, sir, 2998, runway 5 right, fly runway heading, cleared for takeoff.
Tower user 2998, so we figure out what's going on down there. We're just going to stay clear of all runways.
Yes, sir, 2998, roger. Hold short of runway 5 right. He's not anywhere near the runway, but you can hold short.
Okay.
Okay, I think we should give a big round of hero applause to the U.S. Air pilot who said, hey, wait, time out, I'm not going anywhere until we figure out what's going on here. That was a very revealing scenario and a true story, and I think it serves up a lot of thought, and we could probably talk about it for hours after the course is done. But really think about this. We have a lot of things going on. Like I said before, a lot of hazards, dark night, foggy night. The United pilots have made a wrong turn. They initially gave misinformation to the tower controller, stating, I think early on, that they were on runway 23 right instead of being on 23 left. And although they corrected that momentarily, she did not hear it. And so she was expecting them to be one place. They were another place. And the third person in all of this, the third entity, was the pilots in the other aircraft, the U.S. aircraft, with enough situational awareness to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Let's stop and revisit the situation. So we really need to focus on a couple of things regarding all of these scenarios we've been talking about. And that is, one is aeronautical decision making. And when we detect a change, that's the first part of breaking this accident chain. We have to estimate a need to counter or react to that change. We need to choose some desired outcomes. We need to identify actions, maybe to control the change, do whatever is necessary and evaluate the action. And sometimes this happens in a very narrow amount of time. The other thing we have to recognize is our pilot capabilities in the margin of safety change throughout the flight. So in the initial part of the flight, most of the time we have a higher margin of safety than we do as our task requirements go up. And our heaviest task requirements happen at the end of the flight, oftentimes the approach and landing, but in this case, in a hazardous situation, during the taxi. So just as important as learning to actually manipulate the controls of an airplane, that just as important is learning a structured decision making. And situational awareness is part of that. When we talk about situational awareness, we really are talking about a series of things we have to do. We are scanning, we're monitoring, we're keeping a big picture. We're periodically focusing on details. We try not to get sidetracked, and we try to anticipate and prepare for future events. That all comes under the guidelines of situational awareness. So we really have sort of a plane, we have the path, we have people that come into this whole picture of the awareness we have to have around us and in the flight and on board. There's also some mental processes we have to consider for safe flight. There are some automatic reactions that we have. Early on, when you first began learning to fly, you probably had difficulty holding level flight and using the rudders and the throttle at the same time. And then pretty soon those start to become more automatic reactions, just like when you're driving down the road and you look in your rear view, you really don't think about it anymore. And we should also have some automatic reactions to certain types of emergencies. Those are mental processes. Another one is problem solving. And when we talk about problem solving, we really have to resolve a problem, right? We have to say to ourselves, how do I overcome an undesirable situation? And we have to use some sort of systematic process to do that. And then during a flight and during if we're going to have a safe flight, we have to keep reviewing. We have to constantly aware of all the factors. We can't just sit back on our laurels and say, oh, everything's going fine. The environment around us is constantly changing. So that brings me to the final stage of this discussion, and really what we were trying to get at here, the Proficient Pilot's Art of Self-Disclosure. And one of my favorite sayings of John and Martha King said that everybody's a damn fool at least 15 minutes a day. It's a nice take on an Andy Warhol statement, but really, that is what we're talking about here. How we are going to make some mistakes, hopefully none that really injure us or someone else, but what do we do about that? So we talk about this art of self-disclosure. To disclose is to tell a story, to make information known. It's really to confide and to reveal. And what's the purpose of this? Well, we want to refocus in a way that makes something that is previously maybe difficult to understand. We want to give it order. We want to regenerate some sort of hope and confidence and be able to offer a new way to go on differently. That's really what we want to do. Just to be clear, bragging is not what we're talking about here. Bragging is to feel good about something extremely stupid that only you would ever be proud of. And we've all seen it. The pilot comes in and says he likes to fly low and slow and scud. And that's not something that we really adhere to, but we hear people talk about it. Whether it's true or not, that doesn't matter. This disclosure that we're talking about tonight is not about bragging, okay? So, moving on a little bit, many of you who have been involved in the newer style of flight training will recognize that the art of self-disclosure is really nothing more than the kind of analysis that you're subjected to by your flight instructors after a flight and even before a flight. We call it scenario-based training, where we set up missions which provide the pilot in training with decision-making points very early in their training, really right from the get-go. So we have a place we're going to go. We might not say what altitude we're going to go at. We might ask the pilot to make a thoughtful decision about what altitude they think they should go at. And then that starts bringing up questions that the pilot has to make decisions early on from the second or third flight to help them learn this decision-making and analysis. And then after the flight, it's a part of the briefing to go back over the flight and really try to pick out those parts of the flight that were either good or bad from the perspective of the pilot in training. Oftentimes, the pilot in training will have a completely different perspective on how they did than the instructor. So it's very useful to have this sort of disclosure analysis between the two people working together, the coach and the pilot in training. So the next part of this is a story of a student pilot's cross-country flight. And I'm not picking on student pilots, believe me. They're easy to pick on, but this one in particular, this is a story, this came out of a NASA report, aviation safety report, and a very inexperienced student pilot recounted a solo cross-country in which a lot of things happened. But it also is a wonderful reflection on analysis of how this pilot, after the flight, was able to sit down and really think about it and give a very good analysis as to what happened and also what they would do differently or should have done or might do differently next time. And I think it's a revealing example of how we can learn to analyze a flight after the fact, but it also is a way we can learn how to prevent these events from happening to us in the future. So we'll get started.
I was on my third cross-country. Everything was great. I was pleased with my navigation. I got to my destination, KCVO, and entered the traffic pattern for a left downwind for 17. I did get the AWOS. Looking back, though, I should have taken runway 27. I tried to land twice on 17. It rocked my confidence a little, and then someone on Unicom radio, winds from 270 at 6, and I responded, "Thanks, man. I'll change," or something like that. Anyway, I entered a right downwind for 27. Still a little shaken. I called base and final. I wasn't 100% confident at that point, but I set it up and I tried to land. I bounced a little and then I decided to go around. Well, at that point I felt bad. I thought, can I not land this plane, like, ever? So I radioed back, "Y'all have a good day, I'm out of here." I turned to the south and then I really began to worry. Will I make it back home? Will I run out of gas? What if I can't land this plane at all? Just 1,000 questions went through my head. Anyway, I was about 2 miles east of Corvallis, and I thought, I really need to land at that airport. I can't go back without landing at Corvallis. I need to turn around. No, I said to myself, you tried it 2 times or so, and today is just not your day. Go home. But then I remembered Eugene. Eugene's right over there. I could go there, stop, take a break. I just landed there yesterday evening and did 3 really good full-stop landings. So it's close, safe, comfortable, and a good choice to calm down. I got about 4 miles out from Eugene and I radioed the tower. After some miscommunication due to my inexperience, the tower advised to clear to land, right hand for the runway, or something like that. At this point I was okay, a little miscommunication, but that's okay. Then I advised entering right downwind for the runway. I don't think the tower said anything. I thought that I was supposed to let them know where I was. Then I advised turning right base for the runway. And just so you know, I'm not 100% on my right-hand traffic patterns. I have about 80 to 100 total landings. 5 or so are right-hand. I've communicated with 3 or 4 different control towers though, and total with about maybe 10 total communications. That's when he said very sternly and corrected me, "Are you talking to traffic or tower?" I said, "Traffic?" The tower controller replied, "I'm the tower. You're talking to me. If you expect to fly or be flying, you better get your stuff straight." At this point, I was shaken. I was on final. I knew I had to compensate for the unfamiliar right-hand pattern, trying to do the math, the angle, the speed, the flaps, wind settings, and everything. And air traffic control was yelling at me. I was so scared I didn't know if I should call my base leg or what. I do remember trying to do my flaps right and my throttle, my speed. Then am I too high or too low? Anyway, I was getting close to the runway. I touched down, but I skipped. Then I tried one more time to just land. Nope. Skipped again. I knew I was in trouble. I knew that it was bad. I had to go around. So I full throttle, nose down, build speed. The last or next to last skip kind of shot me over to the right at 20 to 30 degrees. I really don't know if it was a wind gust that helped me. Well, I was on course and headed straight for the number 5 sign. So I built speed until I thought it was imperative to pull up to avoid that big sign, and then I hit it. I held on to the climb. I radioed in. I took out the sign, or something like that. The tower asked, "Are you okay? Can you fly the plane? Is the plane okay?" I said, "Yes, I'm okay, and the plane's flying great." The tower said, "I want you to fly over to the fire department. Fly over so the fire department can inspect the landing gear." I thought, great. Not only can I not land today, but I get to try landing without any gear. Super. So I asked if I was too high or too low or too fast or too slow, and the tower said that the fire department said it looked good. Then I advised, "I'm a student pilot. I just tried to land at Corvallis 3 or so times and I couldn't, so I need help. Please, can I land on the left downwind for 3-4 left?" The tower said, "If you think that will help, sure." At this point, his attitude changed 180 degrees. He was now very helpful. I replied, "Yes, sir, it would help. It would absolutely help." So I set it up the way I was taught, did my proper timing and speed and spacing, and I came in and I was very proud of myself. I landed great. Except that when the front tire touched down, I knew it messed up. It was flat. Anyway, this was not a good day. I did learn many things today. Wind direction is very important. Wind velocity is very important. If you bounce once, go around. More practice on right-hand traffic pattern. And if you have someone yelling at you, it's not life or death, it is better to handle it safer on the ground. Don't let them rattle you. Speak up and let them know. It could cost someone their life. Well, I'm sorry this happened. I hope this report will help someone else in the future and make aviation safer.
Wow, well there's an interesting story, huh, from a student's perspective, and let's just talk a little bit about that wonderful analysis. So, here's a chain of events that occurred to this particular pilot, and after the flight, the pilot was able to sit down and really go through the entire flight, step by step, noticing how the problem originally arose, how the problem of having a go-around and a bad landing, which had to do with choosing the not knowing that the winds were stronger than they anticipated. All those problems seem to funnel into the same situation, which was suddenly the pilot felt that he was at a loss for what to do, and he was fearful of landing. So he talked about how he discovered the situations, and then his own personal perceptions, judgments, and decisions around that, and his actions or inactions, as the case may be. And the same is true for the actions or inactions of the air traffic controller. You know, an inaction would be not telling the air traffic controller that you're a student pilot right from the get-go and that you're having problems. If that controller had known that originally, that may have changed this whole set of events. Maybe this pilot would not have hit the sign, and maybe none of this would have happened. So what are the contributing factors? Well, you know, if we really delve into this, you have to wonder about this pilot going out on a cross country, and maybe wonder about the preparedness of this particular pilot, and maybe you have to wonder about the instructor who allowed that to happen. And then talking about corrective actions, what would you do in not just to prevent the same scenario from happening, as if you pretty well think that the pilot won't have this happen to him or her again, but what about for other pilots? What can you do to prevent the same scenario happening to other pilots? And good news, we might call the Witness Protection Program from the wonderful FAA. It may come as a shock to you, but really the primary mission of the FAA is to promote aviation safety and not to have take away your pilot's license if you do something wrong. So to further that mission, they instituted a voluntary reporting that goes through NASA. And this reporting of deficiencies and discrepancies in the system helps all of us, right? It helps the FAA, it helps pilots, because we get to read about them and learn about them. By submitting this report, it also allows you the opportunity to reflect on what happened, but just as importantly, allows other pilots who may want to learn from your experience, and maybe at the very least consider what they might do in the same situation, even if they won't be faced with that same situation in their piloting lives. So you can read more of these NASA reports from their Callback magazine, but it's also very important for you to understand that these are voluntary submissions by pilots, air traffic controllers, flight attendants, mechanics, and they're confidential. There is an incentive. The incentive is that if you submit this report, the FAA waives fines and penalties, subject to some limitations, for any unintentional violations of the federal aviation statutes. So you do have to submit it within 10 days of the event, but that shouldn't be much of a problem. Don't even consider submitting these as only if something event happens which you feel like might have a bad outcome for your license. You should be submitting these for a lot of other reasons. Let's just take a look at how many were submitted in September of 2012. There were over 3,500 submitted by air carrier and taxi pilots, about 1,000 by general aviation pilots, and some maybe 600 or so from air traffic controllers, and it goes down from there. So people are submitting them. This is who's submitting them, and not all of these are because of an infraction. It's an idea is to promote safety, to send in a report of something that has occurred that you think others can learn from and create a safer environment. And there are plenty of ways to submit these reports. You can Google it, you can download it, the form is online, and I urge you to bookmark that, okay, and find it. And then I also would like to urge you to read many of these stories, to subscribe to Callback. It's really a well-written format. It gets your attention, and while many of these are submitted by airline pilots, many also are from those of us who are currently in the general aviation environment. I've submitted several of these, and I'll probably, I used to carry them in my flight bag and little forms out to submit all the time, but now that they're online, it's a lot easier to do. So let's go back and finally discuss what to do if we witness or hear about a story from another pilot. Can we give feedback? Can we give and receive feedback? And are we able to take that as part of our problem-solving ability? And really the aim is, of course, not to give judgmental feedback. When we're dealing with emotions, there's a whole other term to safety, because pilots can be, like anyone, can become defensive about a situation. So how do we give non-judgmental feedback? Well, first of all, let's take a look at how we can not do it right. Let's see how we could be ineffective in our communications. We'll have a look at one of our favorite groups of pilots in training.
In here, please.
Oh, thank you. Oh, hello. I saw your advertisement for flying lessons, and I'd like to make an appointment.
Well, Mr. Lenham is on the phone at the moment, but I'm sure he won't mind if you go on in. Through here.
Thank you.
I won't be a moment. Make yourself at home. No, well, look, you can ask Mr. Maudling, but I'm sure he'll never agree. Not for 50 shillings, no. But, bye-bye, Gordon. Bye-bye. Oh, dear. Bye-bye. Now, Mr. Chigger, so you want to learn to fly?
Yes.
Right, well, up on the table, arms out, fingers together, knees bent.
No.
Up on the table! Arms out, fingers together, knees bent. Now, head well forward. Now, flap your arms. Go on, flap. Faster. Faster. Now, jump! Rotten, you're no bloody use at all. You're an utter bloody washout. You make me sick, you weed.
Now, look here.
All right, I'll give you one more chance. Get on the table.
Look, I came here to learn how to fly an aeroplane.
A what?
I came here to learn how to fly an aeroplane.
Oh, an aeroplane. Oh, I say, we are grand, aren't we? Oh, no more buttered scones for me, mater. I'm off to play the grand piano. Pardon me while I fly my aeroplane. Now get on the table!
Okay, well, obviously there are plenty of ways to communicate what we want, but we're talking about safe feedback, starting with something positive. Contaminants in feedback are things like ought, should, and must, and so taking a forward step by asking how we can improve or avoid something in the future is one way of doing this. So if you have a situation, an example I might give is you had someone cut you off on downwind or crosswind, and you both land, and you want to, maybe that other pilot didn't even know they did it. So really, let's not go into this with the thought that they meant to do it, but let's go into it with the idea of taking a forward step. How can we improve or avoid this in the future? And one way we might do it is just to have a sort of a feedback, to say something like, you know, I really like to fly with you one of these days with your airplane and so forth, but I feel a little awkward about saying this, but it really shook me up in the pattern just now. Did you see me when you entered the downwind in front of me? It's taking a little bit more of a proactive, but also a belief that the person didn't do anything to you on purpose and that we could solve the problem together. So, to summarize, let's summarize what we've learned tonight. What's the proficient pilot? Well, we're all trying to be proficient. And human factors are going to represent the biggest threat to our ability to fly safely. We're going to be error-prone. Pilot judgment requires a thoughtful set of actions, and we can learn these. And we can learn reflective analysis, and when we practice it, we do it better. All right, so let's take a look at what we learned tonight about the proficient pilot and the art of self-disclosure. Let's summarize a little bit. Human factors we know represent the biggest threats to our flying safety. We're human, we're going to make errors. Pilot judgment requires really a thoughtful set of actions, and we can learn these actions through practice. Reflective analysis is part of that, and it is also a learned practice. Something you have to do, just like you do ground reference maneuvers or slow flight or stalls. And Also, we can contribute to the ASRS database of information. When you contribute, it is confidential. They scrub your name from everything, and your information is again out there though to help others learn from your experience. You can also use that database to help you learn. Thank you very much for attending. Again, my name is Dorothy Schick. You can reach me at our office at TakeWING at the Creswell Airport.